Hello and happy Wednesday. Welcome into Believe in Purdue. I'm Sam Sprunger. As always, Grant Flora joins me. Grant, it's a good Wednesday.
It is. Yeah, it's always happy to come back after a win, especially a road win. I mean,
Yeah, and while this was the easiest one of their remaining road games, Carver-Hawkeye Arena is always a really difficult one. Purdue comes out with a 90 to 81 victory against the Iowa Hawkeyes, fueled by a 17-5 run in the second half. Kind of spaced it out and kind of not, I wouldn't say cruised, but kind of kept keeping a decent enough lead that it never really was, except for at the, what was it, 80 to 77. Iowa got it within 3 and had a couple of shots to tie it up, but just couldn't get it to fall. Overall, a pretty darn good, especially second half.
yeah, definitely the second half. I think just like we've seen in a few of their other road games, the first half they were a bit slow, and they could have been in a bigger hole, and then they worked their way out of it and ended up
Yeah.
tying the game with that buzzer beater. But especially offensively, they had a bit of a slow start when TKR got into foul trouble, but they kind of figured some things out going into the second half. I think maybe Coach Painter had some things to say to them, and they got back, scored 54 points in that second half, and their offense looked a lot better. They were making shots. Fletcher Lawyer made 3 threes, which was great to see because he really looked like he was struggling that first half.
Yeah.
And overall, I just thought they played a really good game. Defense could have been better. Definitely some things throughout the game they could have worked on, but to go on the road, not necessarily play your best game, but figure out a way to win it, was pretty good and pretty fun to watch. Could bode well for a future game.
Well, it could have. It looked like it was one of those at the start, like it could turn into one of those trips to Iowa when Iowa jumped out early to a 10-3 lead, and I mean it just didn't look like the Boilers were able to really get into a flow. Then all of a sudden, Trey Kaufman-Renn takes off and just starts hitting shots left and right. At one point, he had 10 of the 13 Purdue points. Like that's he was a big jump start to the Purdue offense. But what got him and what got Purdue into a little bit of trouble about midway through was he ended up getting in that foul trouble, and Purdue kind of searched for who they were gonna have take over, and that's when Braden Smith took over.
Yeah, and I remember thinking kind of that first half of the first half when TKR was doing most of the scoring, I was like, Braden needs to be looking for his offense because he really
Right.
is not doing a whole lot offensively here other than just feeding it into Trey Kaufman-Renn. And then when TKR went out, he was basically forced to. And once he did, it started going better. I mean, he got some nice mid-range floaters or mid-range fadeaways. He got to the rim a couple of times. And then knocked down that 3 to close out the first half. But his offense didn't really come in until the second half when he caught fire from beyond the arc and just really got into his flow. But I think you have to credit the Iowa defense. They did a little bit of what IU did against Purdue, where they kind of brought out this trap deep and basically forced him to the sideline and forced a couple turnovers that way. You saw a couple one was a backcourt violation, one was he stepped on the sideline, but they basically forced him into that corner. And it's actually what you saw IU do on basically that final possession for Purdue when Trey Kaufman-Renn made the game-winning shot. They forced him to the sideline with that trap, forced the ball out of his hands. Purdue was just lucky enough to get it around to like Fletcher Lawyer, who then fed it inside to Trey Kaufman-Renn, but they were still forced into a tough shot. And so I think you're going to see more and more defenses continue to do that to Braden Smith until Purdue figures it out more consistently. But in that scenario, it really worked well. And if Braden Smith gets frazzled a little bit like that, it really takes Purdue out of what they want to do. And again, they kind of were able to figure things out when Trey Kaufman-Renn came back on the court. That helped a lot to draw more attention off of him. But yeah, it was a bit tough for Braden Smith early on. It made for a rougher first half, but by the second half, that offense was running pretty good.
I saw or I heard them talking, and he was 1 of 12 his previous 3 games. 1 of 12 from threes. He ends up 5 of 7, and the fact that he went 11 of 15 from the field, he's not choosing bad shots to take, even though he was being the one relied on to be that offense when TKR went onto the bench because of foul trouble. He still wasn't choosing dumb shots, and I think that bodes well for Purdue in the future when you get to the same situation. Is he's learning to create his own shots. He is becoming masterful in getting in and drawing that pump fake to where the guy tries to block the shot, and then he jumps into it and gets his shot off. He's developing into more than just the prototypical point guard, and becoming a scoring point guard. They had the graphic. I don't know if you saw it, Grant, but there are the notable players to average 15 points, 8 assists, 4.5 rebounds, and 2 steals in NCAA history. Magic Johnson in 1978-79, Gary Payton in 89-90, Kenny Anderson in 89 and 90, and the last one to do it before Braden Smith, Jason Kidd, back in 1993-94. He's doing something that we haven't seen in a really long time.
Yeah, and another graphic they threw up there was Purdue's 12-0 when Braden Smith scores 20 or more points.
Yes.
I don't remember if that was this season or overall, because I don't know how many times Braden's gotten over 20.
I saw the graphic, but I didn't see what if they said it was the season or his career.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was for as long as Braden Smith's been there.
Right.
But it just shows how much of a threat Purdue is when Braden Smith's clicking. Because now you got Braden Smith as kind of the primary guy to stop, but if you start throwing too much at him, he's going to find Trey Coffin-Wren or Fletcher Lawyer or one of those guys. And if they're all clicking, the Purdue offense is basically unstoppable. And their defense is good enough that it makes it really hard for anybody to come in and find a way to beat them. So, and when IU in that last game had success and was able to open up a lead, it was when they frustrated Braden Smith, or at least slowed him down offensively.
Right.
And so it just goes into what you said about Braden Smith kind of being the guy where if he's playing well, Purdue usually will play well, or if not, they won't. Purdue goes as Braden Smith goes. But yeah, it's a remarkable career. I think he probably should be Big Ten Player of the Year if he keeps this up. I think he is the best point guard in America, and rightfully so with his stat lines, with the way he affects winning. I tell you what, if Braden Smith gets hurt at any point this season, Purdue is in big trouble because nothing flows without Braden Smith.
Yeah, and that's not saying the CJ Cox or Jakari Harris or any of Miles Colvin. Doesn't mean they're trash. It just nobody runs this offense like Braden Smith. And he gives, if something were to happen, it's not just the guy that dishes out the ball. It's at least, at worst, the number 2 scoring option in the offense. And, because I was looking at the stat line after, or the season stats, does not include yesterday's game, but Braden Smith's not the leading scorer for Purdue, but yet he puts a career high up and for 31 against Iowa. That tells you how he can blow up at times. I agree. I do think at this point, and it certainly can change, and there's certainly people in the conversation. He is the front runner for Big Ten Player of the Year right now. I don't know of anybody else that's having as much of an effect on the games they play in than Braden Smith.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There just isn't a massive player right now in the Big Ten. Even if somebody like Dalton Connect from last year was in the Big Ten right now, I think he would be the front runner pretty easily for Big Ten Player of the Year. Like there'd be nobody, there's nobody like that. And so I definitely think Braden Smith has a great opportunity. I think he is by no means the clear cut going to get it at this point. I think that he's had a great year, but there are definitely some other players that can
I
get
think
into
if the
that
season ended right
conversation.
now, he would be.
But no, yeah, I would agree with that too. I think he probably is the front runner. I just think if he were to play a little bit less what he's been doing, have a little bit more of a slump, and there are some other players that certainly
Sure. Sure.
have what it takes to overtake him. He's not like where Zach Edey was at this point last year, in my opinion.
To where it
But
was so
yes,
glaringly obvious that he was the
yeah,
player of the year. Yeah.
yeah. But you mentioned CJ Cox and Jakari Harris, and I was thinking that entire game pretty much against Iowa. Those two players have come so far as freshmen from where they started. They're, in my opinion, they're actually the reason why Purdue has made this jump from being the inconsistent team we saw in 2024 to now being this team that is one of the top and potentially the most likely to win the Big Ten at this point. It's because those two guys have given them so many good minutes as defenders,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as rebounders and physical players, but also as scorers. They're much more consistent from three. They CJ Cox especially has just created a lot of good things for them offensively. So Fletcher and Braden Smith and TKR have gotten the most points of emphasis because they're the three best players on the team. But I think it's TJ Cox and Jakari Harris that have really solidified them to take them from being an inconsistent team that can beat a good team but also lose to a bad team to being a team that's going to consistently get the wins and put themselves in a position for a Big Ten title.
Yeah, they've taken on roles. They haven't been pressure. They don't seem like they're completely. And if they are upset about it, they're definitely not showing it on the court. They don't look like they have um, taken it personally that maybe they don't get as much playing time as some might. The fact that they've understood and accepted their role for what it is, and CJ Cox starts. So I mean, that's not saying that he's taking a backseat role. He just doesn't. I mean, he doesn't start every game. He's only started half the games. But the point being is he's seen a lot of starts as a freshman, but yet when he doesn't, it doesn't look like he's sitting there sulking and playing the poor me card. He's accepted, like, look, we have a goal here. We want to go back to where we were last year, and and would love to win one more game, and it's gonna take what it takes. And when we talked to Mike DeCourcy, we mentioned cannon catchings and asking about Matt Painter about guaranteed playing time. I guarantee you those two didn't come in and say I want playing time. They understood the role and said, you know what, we need to earn whatever we're getting, and that is a huge thing, is to have everybody on board with what the overall and our overall arching goal is for this season.
Yeah, and Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer are pretty much the winningest backcourt in the nation at this point. I don't think there's any team that's had two backcourt players that have been together for each of the last 3 seasons who have been as successful. I mean,
Right.
you could argue the last 3 years Purdue's has been a winning or more winningful program. I don't know how you say that. They've won more games and been more successful than any other program, with the exception of maybe UConn. And this year, UConn's been up and down too. So you can't expect, if you're CJ Cox and Jakari Harris, to come in and just have all this playing time when you're backcourt players and you're playing with the best backcourt in the country. Now they have, because that 3 spot has been open and they've been able to come in off the bench. And when you have Miles Colvin and Camden Heide, who were supposed to be bigger pieces of this team, and they just really haven't gotten there, it creates a lot more time for them. But again, Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith are kind of in their positions. So great people to learn from, but also going to take up minutes from you.
For sure, and we can talk about that, further about this game against Iowa, kind of what we see coming up the chute. But let's go ahead and take the obligatory audio podcast break here, so we can get back to talking about what we saw with the Boilermakers in Iowa City on Tuesday night. You're listening to BLEAV in Purdue on the Lounge Sports and BLEAV Network. Okay, we are back. Thank you so much for your patience. But we're just recapping what we saw last night with the 90-81 victory over the Iowa Hawkeyes. Really, honestly, Grant, we kind of chatted a minute before we came on air. I don't know that I would have been feeling awfully good had you told me on Monday Purdue's going to give up 81 points. I don't know that I would have been extremely optimistic about what was going to happen on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, especially considering Owen Freeman didn't play. I mean, that was huge because now Jay Kaufman-Renn and Caleb Furst were able have the ability to dominate the paint. Now, at times, it happened more than others.
Right.
But Trey Kaufman-Renn especially got pretty much whatever he wanted, and Caleb Furst on the glass was able to make a huge impact, and even got 10 points of his own. So, not having Owen Freeman was hurtful for the Hawkeyes, and yet they still put up 81 points. And Peyton Samford and Josh Dix both had phenomenal games. They were shooting much more efficiently from three throughout the game than what they ended up. They were 6% for the game, but they were shooting above 50 for most of it.
Yeah.
And so they did a great job just finding those open shots. And sometimes I feel like I don't know how early they made that decision that Freeman wasn't going to play. It was kind of a shock to me when I opened the broadcast. But if it was a bit of a later decision, sometimes I feel like when one of your best players goes out, it actually can throw the other team for a loop because their whole scheme involved dealing with one of these top scorers, and now he's just not going to play. And so now instead of potentially not having to deal with that player, which is great, you don't have to deal with him, but your whole scheme's been blown up and you don't really have a plan at this point. And it's possible that was part of what happened to Purdue, and Peyton Samford, Josh Dix, and the others were able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, Sanford 23 points and Dix with 27. Then you had Harding, I can't remember his first name, Brock Harding threw in 11 points. So like they got scoring from other avenues throughout the evening, but not having the big guy that really affected some of their offensive planning. But you're right, you scheme certain ways and you have certain game plans, and when you're like, oh wait, now we've kind of got to go with plan B, or kind of go off the cuff and try to adjust to that. They did fine, and the one thing that really caught my attention is they out rebounded Iowa by 7, and that for this year that just hasn't happened enough. And I get it, they're not always going to have a huge height advantage over their opponents, but I think they've got the potential to be a better rebounding team. When the smallest guy on the court is the number 2 rebounder on your team, there's room for improvement. Braden Smith had 7 rebounds, which was only 2 less than Caleb Furst. Now, granted, Trey Kaufman-Renn plays most of that first half. Maybe he out rebounds him as well, but they didn't. We've got to figure out a little bit more about the rebounding game. Find the angles, do something to have a better opportunity and a better output with your rebounding game.
Yeah, and before I address that, I will say I looked for information on Owen Freeman's injury. It looks like he potentially had a season-ending hand injury yesterday. They said on Monday. It's either I'm assuming it's yesterday, saying Monday. Could have been last week, but I feel like we would have heard about that.
Yeah,
obviously, that's terrible news for Iowa that it's season-ending, because he actually has been their leading scorer. So yeah, that hurts. But as far as rebounding for Purdue, I think one of the X factors has been Camden Heide. He had 5 rebounds tonight, but just when he comes in at the 4, his ability, especially on the offensive glass, just trying to find those holes has been really helpful. But I think part of their problem is Trey Kaufman-Renn is just not as elite of a rebounder as you might think, and he's not the biggest guy.
Right.
So he probably has to find a way to get better rebounds. Caleb First did a great job tonight, but he's had his ups and downs as well. So much of it has to do with just lack of size. They just aren't as big of a team, especially in the Big Ten, as what their opponents typically are. And I think tonight they were dealing with a more undersized team with Owen Freeman being out. Part of what helped them to rebound. But I totally agree. It's one of those situations where they've been so good for so long at rebounding that now that you don't have a 7-footer, now that you
a healthy one, anyways,
right? Yeah, a healthy one at least. Now that you have a 7-footer that can play, other than Wilberg, who doesn't end up playing for other reasons. Right. And it makes things so much harder for you. But you're right. If Purdue is a consistent rebounding team and a consistent shooting team, those are two things the broadcasters talked about a lot tonight. They become really dangerous and really difficult to stop. And it could be something where if they can figure those things out, we may be looking at a team that has a chance to compete for another Final Four. It might sound crazy given the season that we've had, just not as good as what we are used to these last couple of years. But at the same time, they have the point guard, they have the coach, they have the players that they have a shot to make a run in March.
Barring a huge regression, I think they have made leaps and bounds towards being one of those teams that could be extremely dangerous in March. It's not a, oh, well, how good that can they how well can they recover from losing somebody like Zach Edey and those other 2-3 parts that are no longer there because of transfer or graduation or whatever. That's I think they've gotten past that now. I don't think they'll never forget Zach Edey, but they've gotten him out of their rear view mirror now to where they don't have to keep looking back to see what they would have done. They're now, charting their own course, and Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, and TKR are all helping us not forget, because I will say forget, but you know what I'm saying when I say forget. Forget about Zach Edey being on that team. He's not there anymore, so we can't keep pulling back to, well, when Zach was here. He's not. So we've got to go find our route. And these guys are doing a fantastic job in finally getting their identity, and there are going to be setbacks. I really do believe they're going to lose at least one, if not 2 more basketball games in this Big Ten season. I just don't, and I want to be wrong about that, Grant. I really do. I'd love to see them run the table the rest of the way, but that's not realistic in my mind either with the murderer's row of what they've got to play. They've still got 4 more games on the road, and this one that they just played in Iowa City was the easiest of the 5 remaining ones. And now some would say maybe going to IU. Going to Bloomington is never easy for Purdue. It's never easy for anybody, I don't think, other than teams that get 30-point wins. But even those wins, when Purdue pulls those off, has pulled those off, I'm shocked that they went into Bloomington and did that. Now, that might be me having grown up watching Purdue go into Bloomington and be embarrassed even when they had a good team. But my point being on that is they've gotten the easy road game out of their way, and they still have 4 more to go.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I would be thrilled if they only lost 1 or 2 more games, because I honestly don't see them being able to win more than maybe 1 more road game. At Indiana, like you said, will be tough. You're talking about the fact Purdue barely escaped out of Mackey against IU. IU's going to be out for blood in that game, and they'll have the crowd behind them. You have at Michigan State, who are the top 2 teams in the Big Ten besides Purdue at this point. And certainly the game against Michigan State could be for the Big Ten championship. And then at Illinois, sure, they've lost some games. They've kind of found themselves in the middle of a fray at this point in the Big Ten. But as far as talent goes, there really isn't anyone that has more talent in the Big Ten than Illinois. It's the last game of the regular season. Again, that could be, at least for Purdue, a must-win game if you want to win the Big Ten. And Illinois will be wanting to put a stop to that, given what happened last year in
Right.
Champaign. So it's just like there's so much going into those games beyond the simple game that is going to make it really difficult. And then Purdue still has to take care of business at home. They still got Wisconsin at home, Rutgers again, UCLA, who's playing phenomenal basketball at this point. I mean, yeah. Not long story short, I think it'd be phenomenal if Purdue came away only losing one or two. But I also think they're capable of being able to win most of those games. I mean, they are playing like the best team in the Big Ten as of right now. And so it's going to be exciting because I would love to see Purdue go three in a row. But it's going to be stressful too.
And full disclosure, we had to record this on Tuesday night after the game, after the Purdue-Iowa game. We don't know at this point while we're recording. So tomorrow when you're watching this, Wednesday when you're watching this, you'll know what the result of the UCLA-Michigan State game is. We don't at this point. So right now, Purdue could be the first place team in the conference, depending on the outcome of that. But I didn't want people to think, well, why aren't you talking about the game? We don't know it right now. And
I was trying to talk around that because I was like,
I got to thinking about it, and we mentioned UCLA and we mentioned Michigan State. So those two are playing right now as we speak. So just so we don't normally. Record the day before, but we had some things that we had to do that. So yeah, today's Wednesday.
No, but certainly looking forward to seeing how that game turns out. Because if UCLA wins that one and Michigan State goes 0-2 on the West Coast, oh man, this is going to be the Purdue and Michigan State will be tied. Actually, Purdue technically will be leading the Big Ten
by half a game,
and by half a game. And it's going to make the last half of this Big Ten season just absolute theater at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an exciting feeling knowing what last year's team was to this year's team. Completely night and day in the fact that you don't have certain aspects of your offense. It's a big cog of your offense is gone. And Purdue had to figure it out. It took them some time. It took them taking some lumps in a couple of spots, and it's really exciting to see these guys develop into a team that is one of the best in the country. I think they've earned their seventh place ranking right now in the top 25. They're one of the best teams in the Big Ten. I don't know that we're shocked that they're necessarily the top of the Big Ten, but having seen how Michigan and Michigan State have performed up to this point, it is a little bit of a surprise, and I'm really happy that they've developed the way that they have up to this point.
Yeah, neither Michigan State nor Michigan were expected to be that good. We're expected to even really be contenders for the Big Ten. It was supposed to be IU, Illinois, and then maybe like Rutgers, UCLA. And so those two teams have made the Big Ten a much more difficult conference. And yet Purdue still finds themselves right at the top of the conversation. So you just have to give so much credit to Matt Painter, to the program at Purdue, Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn, all those guys that came back this season after last season. There were questions on whether this team could function without Zach Edey. And just like you said, they've proved everyone wrong. They've become their own team, I think. Right. This is not a team that is still tied to Zach Edey as far as their basketball playing. This is a team that has figured out themselves and who they are as an identity as this new team.
Yep.
And they've got an opportunity to go make a statement of their own in the next coming regular season Big Ten NCAA tournament.
Well, they've got USC at home on Friday. For Friday's show, we've got Dustin Schutte from Sports Illustrated. He covers Purdue in the Big Ten for Sports Illustrated. He's going to come on and talk about the Boilers, what he's seen from the Boilers up to this point, and we'll also have him there to preview the USC game. So, Grant, I'm looking forward to Friday, and you've been listening to and watching BLEAV in Purdue. We'll see you on Friday.